Chapter 3, Lighting a Sphere. Alright, so now we're going to learn how to render a sphere and in general a curved surface. So what I did here in order to get this perfect circle, all I did was trace the end of this flashlight, and you can use whatever you want in order to make this perfect circle on your page. Again, we're just focused on the rendering aspect this week, do a tracing so we can get that perfect circle. With the cube, we were using the swatches as a reference, but now with the sphere, we have to use the gradients. So in order to make a believable curved surface, we have to really pay attention on how we're controlling our gradients as we render. Now, the reason for this gradation is because the sphere is basically made of infinite planes. And each time you have a plane change or a form change, the value will change. I've gone ahead and lit this sphere with a flashlight, and what I want you to see here is this really important aspect known as the core shadow or terminator. This core shadow is basically where the light source is going tangent with the edge of the sphere. So as you'll notice, as I move the flashlight around the sphere, the core shadow also changes, and it's also in relation to the cast shadow on the ground, just like the cube. So as we construct the sphere, we're going to be drawing ellipses in order to find these shadows. We're also going to talk about some of the aspects of the reflected light and the midtone as it changes on a curved surface. But as long as you take note of these few terms that I go over about the sphere, it'll pretty much relate to all curved surfaces, just like cones and cylinders. To start off our construction, once we have a circle down, we're going to think about the light ray angle, just like the cube. So here I'm just going to pick about a 45-degree angle, just to make it easier for myself. And it'll also give me a nice range in terms of the cast shadow. So that way it's not too long and not too short. So what you'll notice here as I'm making the marks of where the light rays are tangenting on the sphere. I'm also drawing the ground plane as you see here. But now we have to draw an ellipse. So imagine an equator around this sphere where the light is also tangenting all the way around. So this is known as the core shadow, like I mentioned earlier, or also the terminator. The reason it's called that is because that is where the light is terminating and turning into shadow. So I'm drawing the dots kind of like I was making the sticks for the cube. And here I'm just going to draw down and draw the light rays on the other side. From these 4 points, we can then start to construct the cast shadow onto the ground. Here you can use ellipse guides if you have them. They're kind of pricey, so I would recommend to just freehand these as long as you're able to make the perfect circle initially. Blocking this in shouldn't be too bad. Just remember to draw through, and this is all the stuff we learned from week 1 and 2. Just drawing through these forms. Alright, so once we have this all constructed, we're going to start thinking about both the swatches and gradients. Now for the cast shadow, we can just use a simple 50 to 60%, just like we did with the cube. and just block in a nice flat value. So take your time and make sure you use your swatches and gradients for reference to see how dark you need to go. From here, once I have a nice even value, I'm going to use the same value to block in the core shadow down to the rest of the shadow side. And as you render where the ellipse is for the equator or the core shadow, you want to make sure you are rendering across that curve and not doing a straight line. And you'll notice here I'm not really using a gradient quite yet. I just want to make sure I have the light and shadow side separated with this 50 to 60% value. I'm also using an eraser to take out some of my construction lines, and it's especially important with this sphere because there's a lot more subtlety going on in that section, and I don't want those construction lines to get in the way of my values. Now what you'll notice here is I'm going to start darkening my core shadow. Now the reason the core shadow is darker than what's below it is because we need to make room for the reflected light. So just a reminder that the core shadow and the cast shadow are related, and you can kind of keep them about the same value for now. And in general, that's a good rule of thumb, especially when you're doing this from your imagination. So from here, I'm really being a little bit more careful now as I work my way with the gradients. And I'm constantly checking my reference in order to really make sure I'm getting the right tones. So here in the midtone section, I'm doing about a 25-30% gradient as I work my way towards the highlight. So here I have to use a lighter pencil and make sure I slow down in order not to over darken it. Again, just make sure you squint your eyes and just double check your values. I'm also marking where the highlight will go with another ellipse. And I'm thinking about the roundness of the form. So the highlight is usually in relation to the core shadow as well, especially on a matte surface such as this one. So this is the halftone or midtone. The names are interchangeable. And I'm going to go back in here and use the eraser to clean out the highlight area that I marked off. So we have the highlight, the halftone, the core shadow, the cast shadow. So there's going to be a couple more as we work our way through in the shadow section. So here I'm just refining a little bit and getting those gradients. Okay, so now we're going to talk about that bounced light again, or that reflected light, and really showcase how it affects the sphere. So a little bit of that light is bouncing in and is lighting up the surface underneath. So that's why the core shadow will be the darkest section. So I'm doing everything in real time just to show you how to handle some of the subtleties in here, especially with graphite. And it really doesn't take too long as you are aware of these sections. And as I'm squinting my eyes, I can see that I can get a little bit more of a gradient down here, as well as in my midtones. So if you can find pictures of spheres, or if you're able to have some kind of model, or any kind of ball that you can light with a flashlight, you can see these aspects happening. So this is the sixth and final one, which is the occlusion shadow, or the contact or pit shadows. So just like we did in the cube, we marked it with the dark pen. So for this contact or occlusion shadow, it's at the very bottom where the light, can't reach any of the surfaces. So you can continue to refine areas even in the occlusion shadow or the cast shadow. You can create subtleties with the gradients. So as the shadow gets further away from the object, it'll receive a little bit more of some scattered lighting, so you can make a gradient out of that. But these are things we can go over during the Q&A sessions to elaborate a little more. But there are really only 6 terms that you have to keep track of and really simplify your values to make this read. So there you have it. Once you have your gradients set, you can pretty much make a sphere or any kind of curved surface read and make it look round.